Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Tim McGuinness. I'm the managing director of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, Inc. We are a nonprofit crime victims assistance, advocacy, services, and support organization supporting scam victims worldwide. From our offices in Miami, Florida, as well as Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, sister office in Guangzhou, China, and partners in over 95 countries around the world, including partnered with organizations like the Global Cyber Alliance. Joining me on my call today, or our call today, is Debby Montgomery Johnson, another SCAR's board member, director, and officer, and our special guest, Brett Johnson. And I'm going to let Brett tell us his own background in just a moment. So today, what we're going to talk about is a little bit of a complex concept and topic. We're going to talk about how scams, fraud, cybercrime, and their various forms are escalating almost out of control. SCAR's analytics indicates that we've seen a 400% rise since 2019. Some estimates are that it's rising at a rate of around 70% per year now. The Gallup organization did a recent study that showed that 49 million Americans have been the victim of an online scam or fraud. And of course, that includes text, SMS, and phone scams as well. And that number is escalating. Some estimates are now that within 2 years, by 2025, every American adult will have been the victim of a scam. Some scams are relatively minor. Some scams are catastrophically major. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Brett, tell us who you are, tell us what you do, and tell us about your new podcast.
Sure.
Your thoughts.
All right, Tim, Debbie, thank you for inviting me on. I truly do appreciate that. My name is Brett Johnson. Where to begin on introducing myself? Let's say that I was a former United States most wanted cyber criminal, now trying to turn good guy. And I say trying to turn because it's a path for me. I don't commit crime, but I am constantly trying to learn what it is to be a healthy, beneficial citizen to society instead of the not so beneficial, not so healthy, completely toxic person that I used to be when I was a active criminal. The Secret Service called me the original internet godfather. Now, how do you get that title? Well, with me, it was 39 felonies placed on the United States Most Wanted list. I escaped from prison. But the real thing that gets me that title is I built and ran the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew, precursor of today's darknet markets. It lays the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels operate today. Those 39 felonies had to do with refining modern financial cybercrime as we now know it. So I am widely considered that godfather of financial cybercrime. Nothing to be proud of. I served prison time, significant prison time for that, got out, and I was fortunately given the opportunity to turn my life around through my sister, my wife, Michelle, and then finally the FBI. And I work with law enforcement today. I work with Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies, with SCARs, with nonprofits worldwide to help protect businesses and consumers from that type of individual that I used to be. And Tim mentioned my new show. It's called Criminal Thoughts. It's on YouTube right now. It's soon going to be available on all different types of platforms. But we talk about crimes past, present, future. We try to dive into the mindset of criminals. We talk to law enforcement, security professionals, lawyers, judges, whoever we can to get an insight into the criminal mindset. Because if you can understand who your attacker is, and it's not until you understand who your attacker is that you can properly figure out how to defend yourself from these types of crimes that are happening. And of course, my focus is on scams, frauds, cybercrime, identity theft, things like that. Tim?
Okay, thank you. Debby, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, I'm Debby Montgomery Johnson. No relationship to Brett, except friends through this organization. And it's really interesting because years ago, Brett would not have been my friend. He would have been that guy that I would have been extraordinarily upset with. and angry at, and would probably never have talked to him. But it is amazing over the 10 years that I was a scam victim in my quest to become a survivor, thriver, advocate, podcast host, etc. I've learned so much from Brett and other folks because I've learned, like you said, you have to learn who the criminals are and how they work. And thanks to Dr. Tim and Scars, I've learned an incredible amount over the years about myself and about how my brain works and how my heart worked or didn't work at that point, and how to prevent and go forward trying to be as safe as possible online, in addition to telling others, again, how to do it from a victim-centric point of view, but not staying in that victim place. So that's where I am, and I'm really grateful for all that I can learn from both of you gentlemen and the stuff that we can help share around the world, because even though this is, we feel like we're doing a lot to get the message out there, it's amazing to me how many people come to us on a daily basis and say, I wish I'd heard your stories before, or, why isn't your message out there? And even though we think it is, so many people are not hearing what we have to say, and they're not believing it until it actually happens to them. And that's the tough part. So thanks for having me, Tim, and good to see you, Brett.
Good to see you.
Great, thank you. So what we were hoping to do today was have a conversation, somewhat boundless. So we'll see where it goes on 4 basic topics. And those 4 topics were basically the explosion of scams. It's only getting worse, and there's a variety of manifestations, things that we can all see that contribute to that. And then how do we as a society go about limiting what criminals can do? How do we constrain the predation that's happening? Then let's talk about disruption. What disruption is, where it's working, where it's not working, to the extent that we can. And in an ideal world, how might we reduce scams, fraud, cybercrime by 98%, say in 3 years, if you could do anything about it? So let's talk about that first one. Let's talk about the explosion of scams, fraud, cybercrime, and the like. Brett, you're actively involved in observing criminal behavior in various social media. We see it from the victim's perspective, although we observe criminals as well. We, like you do, we interface with law enforcement in a variety of ways. We have a new partner who's active on the ground in West Africa and in other places, performing arrests. They're going to announce a dozen or so arrests this weekend in Ghana. They were responsible for 40 plus arrests in Nigeria on their last trip last month. I have personal connections within the People's Republic of China with their Ministry of Public Security, and I got them started on really looking at scams in December of 2017. And since then, they have arrested in excess of 3 million scammers inside of China. They are deadly serious about this. I guess they don't want competition, but that's a different story, right? And Debbie, like myself, is also very much looking at the world from a victim-centric perspective. We cannot reach all the victims that need to know about this. And even if we could, they won't listen to us, because cognitive biases and vulnerabilities being what they are, people are predisposed to being susceptible. So avoidance, education, and training isn't the answer. It hasn't been the answer since I've started looking at this phenomenon 32 years ago. Back when my tablets were made of stone. So the idea is avoidance doesn't work. We all now know that. But what's your perception of some of the drivers of what's causing this explosion now?
It's interesting. I mean, it's really interesting. So give you an idea of some of these numbers. When I was running Shadow Crew Federal government shut us down 2004. We ended with 4,000 members at that point in time. Fast forward to 2017, the largest criminal network is called Alphabet. Federal government or worldwide government shuts it down, 240,000 members. Fast forward 2019, just a dark web marketplace called Black Market gets shut down, 1.15 million members, all of that pre-pandemic. Now, during the pandemic, what happens? Of course, we have stimulus programs put into place with no security, and I mean absolutely no security in place for at least 6 months. At that point in time, you have a massive influx of fraudsters. So that's part of the reason right there, but it goes beyond that. Today, when I was a criminal, we had to understand every single dynamic of the crime that we were committing. We had to understand how to do the crime. We had to understand our own operational security so we could remain anonymous. We had to understand the security systems that we were trying to bypass. We had to understand how to launder money. We had to understand how to run drop addresses. You had to understand every single element that was going on. That's changed now. Today, you can go in and immediately succeed at online crime without understanding any specific part of anything that you're doing. You can buy a tutorial. You can take live instruction classes. Every product and service is off the shelf. I don't need to understand the security system because I can buy a product that bypasses that for me. I don't need to understand how to run drop accounts or launder money. It's done for me these days. That attributes greatly to the success and the growth of cybercrime. If cybercrime were a country, it would have the third largest economy on the planet. That's how big and important this is from the criminal angle. Well, not just the criminal angle, from everyone's angle. It goes even further than that, though. You've got a network. When I built Shadow Crew, we understood even back then, way back 20 some years ago, we understood that by being open sourced, by collaborating, sharing and exchanging information, that we would become more educated across the board and more profitable across the board. And today, that's still the case. Today, the good guys, they don't really collaborate. They don't share and exchange information. And there's a few reasons for that. You've got regulations, you've got privacy concerns, but you've also got competitive edges where a specific organization, yeah, they'll be hit with an attack, but they will not share that with any of their competitors because of this, next door neighbor type policy. If I place security in place, hopefully they'll leave me alone and hit my competitor. And that's exactly what I want to happen. So because of all that and many more reasons, I mean, you've got jurisdictional problems, you've got manpower problems that attribute at the end of the day to the rise in cybercrime. But I would say it goes even further than that. I would say that we live in a society today where individuals are given multitudes of reasons to not be accountable or acceptable for themselves. They can blame anything at all for their actions instead of taking responsibility. At the same time, we're looking at mass media, we're looking at many different corporations that they themselves commit a lot of fraud and not so legal.
Not to mention the government space.
Not to mention the government. And I fully believe a lot of that trickles down, that idea that if we have a corrupt government, that it bleeds down to everyday on the street citizens. And they think, well, hell, if the government can do it, I can do it too.
That's right.
So I really think that everything together lends itself to the rise in cybercrime and fraud and scams that we're seeing. And you're absolutely right. That 400%, I would say it's going to ramp up a heck of a lot faster and more than that.
What have you seen? So we're looking at certain segments of the criminal population that are out there, particularly those that are involved in what we characterize as relationship scams.
Sure.
Where there's a trust relationship between victim and criminals, right? So
Right.
We're looking at Brazil, we're looking at Southeast Asia, we're looking at India, we're looking at Africa. Now, prior to the pandemic, interestingly enough, we were seeing a gigantic surge in sub 18-year-old criminals in Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, etc. Post-pandemic, we've seen most of them disappear.
Okay.
Partly they've aged and they become adult and they've continued in their criminal activities. But what we're not really seeing is the level of recruiting that we were seeing before. Now, flip that around to the US and Europe, involved in other kinds of crime like synthetic identity fraud, credit card fraud, mail fraud, all the like.
Right.
Are you seeing a significant or notable shift in the age demographic going down?
It really depends on the type of fraud. What we're seeing that may account for a good part of this is we're seeing more and more street type gangs that are transitioning from the street crime into the online world. All right. And not only are they transitioning, but they're trying to bring not only the mindset, but a lot of the types of crimes from that street level to the online environment. And as such, I think that you're seeing it on average, it's aging out a little bit. Okay. But channels like or platforms like Telegram, what they allow is they allow someone that you mentioned recruiting. So there's really no need to recruit if I can go on to Telegram and build my own channel of
Right.
crime on Telegram. It causes me to have my own team or my own group at that point in time. There's no one that's recruiting me at that point. As far as you're looking at the decline of Nigerian scammers or some of these other countries that's going on. What I would say that lends itself to that is that there has been a lot of attention on those countries committing those specific types of crimes, and that increased attention has resulted in more security, better law enforcement practices, more prosecutions, overall awareness overall. I said overall twice, but it's increased awareness overall, and as a result, we're seeing those numbers decline. What we're not seeing an increased awareness of are scams in general across the planet. We're concentrating on one specific area, and while it may decline in that one area, it's continuing to ramp up in other areas. And I think that's very problematic because these guys, you take during the pandemic, I was seeing 16-year-old kids on Telegram bragging about stealing $60,000 a week, committing unemployment fraud. They are not going anywhere. If you're able to steal that much and you're not going to get arrested, and you're not, what impetus, what is going to cause you to just all of a sudden one day change your mind and decide that you're going to lead a legal life and profit much less money? Nothing's going to do that. So I think that's a lot of the problems that we're seeing right now.
Yeah. Although we have seen some interesting shifts. We
Sure.
haven't actually seen a decline in West Africa, but enforcement has had its effects. One of the interesting things is a significant decline in certain kinds of relationship scams in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Russia, for example. But interestingly, that's shifted from our perspective into places like Brazil. But also, the Chinese are just going insane by moving out of China itself, one step ahead of law enforcement, I believe, into places like Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, etc., with these slave call centers.
Sure.
And slave call centers is a bit of a misnomer. Many, in fact, truly are slaves and abused, etc. Many go along with it because they're making more money than they could make at home.
Right.
The Indians doing what the Indians continue to do, their call center style phone scams, etc. Quite proud of the Indian law enforcement. They've gotten religion, not funded it too well, but at least they're making the effort. By contrast, something that Debbie and I heard this last week, which came as a bit of a shock, and I've been able to corroborate and verify, is, a lot of times through your efforts, through our efforts, through others' efforts, we identify a criminal. Sometimes we have an identity, sometimes we don't, but we turn it over to their local law enforcement to do with what they can.
Mm-hmm.
Canada apparently has developed this policy at the RCMP level, apparently, where they're no longer going to notify the host country anymore because that criminal's civil rights might be violated. Poor criminal. Now,
Right.
I get it. I understand Canada's point of view, but it's also no way to stop crime, and it's no way to protect Canadian citizenry either. So maybe what we can do then is sort of segue into the next topic, which is how do we pragmatically, practically begin to limit these crimes? What can be done? We're going to talk about disruption and those actions specifically in a moment, but what can we do in general? I mean, you've, as one person, found a way. Essentially, what you're doing is a variation on scam baiting, and we have challenges with the ethics of scam baiting, but not the way you're doing it, because you're completely upfront with everybody involved.
Right.
And that's ethically brilliant, because what I'm seeing, correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm seeing is a big part of the deterrent value that you bring to the table is the fact that these criminals are having their oh shit moment, realizing they've got a serious person coming after them.
Right.
With real credentials. So talk a little bit about what you think in general, people like yourself, people like us, law enforcement, government, what can we do to try to limit these? Because nothing seems to be working.
Sure. And so with me, there's so much out there that causes this issue that could be fixed if we were collaborating and working together. You mentioned Canada. Right. In their infinite wisdom, they have decided not to collaborate, share, and exchange information. Meanwhile, criminals every single day do that, succeed, and grow. So it really boils down to how much are you willing to share and exchange? And we've got a lot of issues on this planet. You know, a lot of people are worried about their privacy and their data and things like that. And a lot of these people are more than willing to give up their privacy and their data for any type of free item that might be given to them via the phone. Meanwhile, you know, you've got Facebook, you've got Apple, you've got all these companies that talk about how they're going to deploy encryption so that their privacy is secured. And I've got to be honest with you, Tim, and it may not be welcomed or accepted by some of your viewers, but I do not give a damn about your privacy if there is a child predator that's out there that needs to be identified.
We're absolutely in agreement.
Okay, and I don't care. I do not care that you may want your WhatsApp conversation with your mistress encrypted if there might be a terrorist attack that's being planned via WhatsApp. I don't care. That takes a secondary stance to anything else that's going on out there. People don't really appreciate that, though. We have to understand that these are very powerful tools, and they're very beneficial tools in the right hands, but in the wrong hands, they are not. And we really need to have that conversation. And unfortunately, those policies and regulations that need to be put into place, they need to be informed and educated policies and regulations. However, we tend to have a government of people who are putting these things into place that are not informed and are not educated on what needs to be done. So that's a lot of the issue. You know, we've got law enforcement. Law enforcement has, just take the FBI, for example, 37,000 FBI agents, 280 thereabouts concentrate on cybercrime. You've got a lot of problems that are out here.
And less than a quarter of them on individual victims.
Right. So just consider these things. And if we, because of the manpower problems, because of the lack of really good regulations, informed regulations, because of the lack of collaboration, we have a lot of these issues. 90% plus of every single attack uses known exploits. You know, we hear this conversation that's frequently put out there that these are sophisticated attacks. These are sophisticated scams. They're really not. They're really not. You know, it's you mentioned it at the beginning. We're built to trust. You know, we really are. And we're very susceptible to that because we as human beings, we want to help. We want to trust. We don't want to think the worst of people. But, you know, we need to get to the point where we're raising that situational awareness in an online environment. Typically, we're very good in the physical world of having that situational awareness. So, you know, if you're asking me what needs to be done is more collaboration, more sharing and exchanging of information, proper regulations and policies in place, and increased situational awareness of our environment, both online and offline. And just we have to start to understand that a lot of these scams happen because of emotional reactions. We have to understand that by pausing, taking our time, not giving that knee-jerk reaction to things, that a lot of this stuff is mitigated. But we also have to understand that a lot of these frauds are long-term frauds. It's not the process of trying to get you to send a few dollars. It's a process of getting you to send every dollar.
Okay, but I'm going to stop you there because
Sure.
so the direction that you've gone in comes back to the fundamental problem,
Mhm.
putting the emphasis on the victim to
Prevent.
avoid the crime. We know that does not work.
No, it does not. It does
So,
not. All
so
right.
I think one of the things that, as you say, through collaboration, we all need to come to a collective agreement
Right.
is we cannot rely on the individuals to have any meaningful solutions.
Right.
Victims can't stop these crimes any more than they can stop, you know, a 15-member local gang of thugs in their neighborhood. It takes outside intervention to solve them. Now, one of the things that was suggested to me this week was a crazy idea. And that is, the United States has this weird history and heritage of bounty hunters.
Okay.
Why couldn't we employ? Now, bounty hunters serve two roles. There's skip tracers, obviously, for those that have skipped out on bail and bonds, etc. They also serve a role in bringing in individuals who are wanted by the police where there's a reward. So, in other words, locate and capture.
Right.
Do you think that if government and law enforcement developed a standardized system for rewards, that we would see more of a commercial enterprise develop around identify, locate, and capture?
So there's a few issues with that.
I'm sure there are.
Yeah, and my major issue with that is that, you know, you're talking about cybersecurity people. You're talking about people that are on the good guy side of the fence, and there's no other way to say it than they simply don't have the stomach for it. All right, you have to consider who you're dealing with and the motivations of the individuals, those attackers, those criminals that you're dealing with. If I'm a criminal, what am I willing to do to avoid a 20-year prison sentence? What am I willing to do if I know that you've got 8,000 Bitcoins and I know that I just need to ask you a few questions properly with a hammer to get those Bitcoins, all right? The element of violence is absolutely there. Now, a lot of cyber criminals are not going to do that. But if you're faced with a 20-year sentence and you're really aware that you could potentially get that, and it takes you punching somebody, would you do that? If it takes you swatting somebody, would you do that? Or intimidating their family members or anything else like that, would you do that?
Some scammers already do.
Some
It is
scammers
one of the
already
most
do.
standard exit strategies for even romance scams.
It's very
To
effective.
instill tremendous fear and terror in the victim before they depart so that they will not report.
Right. Now
Even
that
though there is no
fear,
risk.
but that fear and intimidation has to Be truthful. You can't just tell somebody that you're going to do that and not be willing to do that.
Right.
Somebody out there is going to be willing to do that. And I'm not quite sure that a lot of these people who would be all gung-ho for instituting a type of bounty program would have the constitution to put up with that, to accept that type of risk. Because, if I'm still committing crime and I used to do this, Tim. I used to, my members on Shadow Crew, they towed the line because I told them that if
Right.
you mess up, I will get you to the point where your family looks at you funny at the holidays. And I meant that. All right. No physical violence. We didn't practice physical violence at that point, but just what I was able to do from behind a keyboard, I will get it to where you will be a pariah within your own family. Now,
Right.
do you want to do that? So that's something that most people don't appreciate. That they're worried about swatting attacks. Swatting attacks are really serious.
We've
I had
had them.
I had to contact the dispatcher in my hometown just a few weeks ago. FBI did that for me to avoid being swatted in my own house. It's serious. And most people are not going to be willing to engage with that type of stuff. So I think that that's an issue. You've got countries that absolutely will not put up with that type of action at all. You've got attack if you're not doing anything physical, but you're trying to locate or identify the person online. Are you messing up potential investigations that are already in place? Yeah, you could be.
Absolutely.
So it's got a lot of problems. I like the idea of being proactive. I really like that idea because we as on the other side of the fence, on the good guy side, we are typically not proactive at all. We're reactive. We're always reacting to whatever the criminals are
The
attacking.
problem with being proactive is it's expensive.
It is. It is.
It takes a lot of time and energy devoted towards analysis,
Yep.
research, investigation, identification, before you can even get to an individual that you could potentially take action on. Now, there's and I'm not necessarily trying to plug them, but there's an investigation company by the name of Rexfield. On behalf of their clients, they're engaged in action on the ground, boots on the ground in countries like Nigeria and elsewhere. And they show up, they get people arrested.
Sure.
They stop at the local gendarmes and the EFCC or whoever it happens to be. And here, these are the people we're going after. And you will be able to see clearly that they are tax avoiders. And that's usually the best approach to take to arresting cyber criminals, is you don't have to have much proof, just demonstrable wealth with no account
Right.
of where it came from.
Right.
In fact, in Ireland, they have a curious government agency called the CAB, Criminal Assets Bureau. And what they do is they use a quasi-civil criminal process. CAB identifies a criminal.
Mhm.
They look at his assets, and then they take it to a judge to essentially get the judge to do a seizure order in much the way cryptocurrency is being seized today, which is not really a criminal process.
Right.
It's a quasi-civil process. It's show cause why we shouldn't seize your property. Prove to us where you legitimately got it from.
Right.
And if they can't show cause, they lose it. And that goes into the next topic, which is disruption. Obviously, criminality of any type, unless you're a sociopath, psychopath, you're in it for some profit margin. And if that profit margin can be significantly disrupted, the criminals who have less stomach for the hardcore
Mhm.
will try and find more legitimate, honest means of employment.
I would agree with that.
So, what's your perception of the disruption techniques that are being used today and their effectiveness?
I mean, we've seen some very effective disruption techniques, as you refer to them. There's a reason that most online criminal marketplaces, they do not allow weapons to be sold, or palm sugar, or fentanyl, or
Right.
GHB. A lot of them don't allow GHB. So there's a reason for that, and the reason for that is because the consequences far outweigh the benefits, the profit that's there.
And,
So
just the visual awareness of them is the crime.
right, right. So if you go onto a marketplace and it has Glocks for sale, which is a very good weapon, if you have those Glocks for sale on your marketplace, you can bet that law enforcement, they really are scouring that marketplace to try to shut it down as much as possible. You don't want that attention. Same thing for fentanyl. For example, with fentanyl, Alexander Kazaa, he ran Alpha Bay. Fentanyl was being sold on Alpha Bay. At least 3 people had purchased fentanyl there and had overdosed and died as a result of purchasing fentanyl on that website. Alexander Kazaa would have faced life in prison if he had been prosecuted. He chose not to be prosecuted and he hanged himself. But that's part of the consequences that you're seeing. That if the consequence is so high that if you're caught, you are facing a life sentence because you allowed it on that platform, it's easier to say, you know what, this one item we're not going to allow. So the consequences matter. That's the reason that Ross Ulbricht gets not 1 but 2 life sentences at the end. They wanted to send a message that, hey, we're taking this stuff seriously.
Or
So
the marketplace owner in Turkey who was given 12,000 years as a sentence.
right, right. That sends a message. It absolutely does. So the consequences have to be there. The thing is like I've said, you can't, and I've said this before many different times and places, we're at a point that you cannot arrest your way out of this problem. There's simply too many criminals that are out there. You can't do it.
Yes.
So what I advocate for, and I think you've seen me talk about this or read some of the stuff that I've written, is this idea of poisoning the well. So a lot of criminals that are out there, especially the new people that are coming in, they really don't understand who to go to, where to buy from, what to buy, what to attack, how to attack it, anything else like that. If you can go to one of these larger communication channels, whether that be the platform Telegram itself, one of the larger channels that's on there, some of the subreddits, Dread on the dark web, what have you, if you can go to these environments and poison the well, sow enough distrust in those environments that people no longer know who to trust, who to buy from, who's telling you the truth, anything else, those environments tend to dry up and go away. Now, that's a very cost-effective way to poison the well. It does not result in any arrests at all, but it absolutely,
it's disruptive.
It disrupts, and that's what we're looking to do. You can't solve the problem by identifying and arresting everyone. You're not going to do that. For example, on Telegram, I am now quote unquote friends with a ransomware individual who has been in the ransomware game since 2010. He's not about to be arrested, and I know that, I understand that, but what he's doing is he's targeting his competitors. And the reason he's targeting them, he doesn't like that some of his competitors target hospitals or infrastructure. And the reason he doesn't like that is it brings a lot of attention to ransomware as an attack method. And
Right.
it hurts his business. So it's that consequence again. So it's really adopting the idea and using the idea of, the enemy of your enemy is your friend and vice versa. So if you can disrupt these environments by whatever legal means you have at your disposal, it becomes very effective and very cost effective. And I think that's really the way that you have to go at the end of the day.
Okay. So given all of that,
Mhm.
in an ideal world, you're absolutely right. We can't arrest our way out of it
No.
because there simply aren't enough law enforcement agents or officers in the world to arrest the number of criminals that are currently operating.
Right.
Our best guesstimate is it exceeds 5 million, but it could be 10 million. We
Right.
don't know. And these criminals target the citizens of their own countries as well as those outside. They're very effective. I recently did a study on the history of deceptive crimes going back a few thousand years. Much to my, I knew some of it, but much to my surprise, I found out that there's really nothing new except for the technology driven aspects of these crimes. There were forms of ransomware that existed in ancient Egypt, which is that they would put feces or dead animals in the well, right? It's a form of ransomware, in effect. If you don't pay us, we'll contaminate and poison your wells, or we'll poison your livestock, or other bad things. So the reality is, none of these crimes are particularly new. They've been with us from the beginning of time. But what society has figured out how to do at various times, and by the way, this kind of criminality is hand in glove with the fall of civilizations. The outright corruption of civilizations, whether it was Rome, whether it was Greece, whether it was Egypt or China, were the precursors to their susceptibility to being overthrown. And it's pretty clear correlation. But in a lot of them, what they developed was a particular intolerance to crime. You know, what we call stage magic today, or close-up card magic, etc. That was all a form of a con game in ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and ancient Rome, etc. There were the equivalent of grandparent scams in ancient Rome. So none of this is new, but what they decided they were going to do was very simple precaution. If you were caught committing a crime, you'd lose your hands or you'd lose your head.
It's effective.
It's effective because, one, you don't get out of prison and start doing it again, which most scammers and fraudsters and cyber criminals tend to do. If they're sentenced, like in Nigeria, to 1 year or to to community service. If you could have your perfect world, and I'm going to ask Debbie the same for you.
Sure.
So think about it. If you could have your perfect world, how would we solve this problem?
You know, you mentioned something about the cutting the hands off. I was very fortunate that last year I was able to visit Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Been there too.
Yeah, and
Did
Riyadh
you see the square where they conducted the whippings?
I did. But you know, it's really interesting because in Riyadh and through much of the Middle East, you can leave your cell phone, your wallet, your watch on a table in public, walk away for 5 to 6 hours, come back, and your wallet, your phone, your laptop, your watch is still right there. No one has touched it.
Interestingly, I watched Lawrence of Arabia yesterday.
Okay.
And that was not the culture 100 years ago.
But it is now.
Yes.
I was, and I lead into this, and I mentioned something else that really resonated with me on another show that I do. The gentleman mentioned that at the end of the day, we need community to be safe. And I really like that idea. I really do. You know, we as a individual, or even as a family, as an individual, we're not as safe as we are with a family. With a family, we're not as safe as we are as with a community. Everyone working together toward the same goals. And I like that. You know, I think that it starts at the individual. And I'm not saying that you can protect yourself. A lot of these scams, you know, your identity, things like that, that's way out of your reach already. All right. You don't have to go online to have your identity stolen by someone online. You know, it's just out there. But it comes with that. I mentioned it before, that awareness. But we have to get to the point where we understand that, and this is this high concept stuff that, you know, in the world where if everything worked the way that I would like it to work, that we love each other as we love ourselves, and we do unto each other as we would have done unto us. And there was a guy way back in the day who said something very similar to that. And somewhere along the way, we've lost that. We've lost that.
But remember what was done unto him.
Oh, I do. He said it, and then they nailed him to a tree.
Right.
Yeah. But you know, it's still something to aim toward. You know, there was his followers. They said it, and they were whipped, nailed to trees, killed, beheaded, everything else. And they still
Right.
believed in that idea enough, knowing the consequences, that they followed by that. You know, we have to, I really do believe we have to, even though we're going to fail most every day at that, we should still be striving toward that. That's just my belief. And that's not a cybersecurity belief. That's not a cybercrime belief. That's just being a better human being belief. And I think that if we could start to strive toward that, that maybe over time we start to get where we're seeing less and less of these problems occur.
Well,
Can I agree with that?
I don't have the answer either, so I'm going to go over to you, Debbie.
Well, I was going to jump in on that because that community is really important, and it goes, you know, for me, it starts in the family, and that whole breakdown of the family and all that it's all led to that. Because, you know, here we hear the scammers are always saying, well, you know, I don't have my family, I don't have my parents, I'm taking care of my siblings, I need all this money, blah, blah, you know, it turns out to be very greedy at that point because they're not watching out for my family.
Right.
Watching it's selfishness. In the community where we have, it's the victim, and this is the one thing is I in the ideal world, we need to get away from the victim blaming, because anybody can be taken.
Absolutely.
Until you get taken that you stop blaming others. You know, it's like, oh gosh, no, now I can get taken. So
And
that
there are many of us in our collective organizations that are doing exactly that right now.
exactly. But it's a learning curve for those outside. I mean, we all know when we've gone in front of the media, especially me, the first thing they want to do is like, oh, you know, you hear that vacuum suck. How much money did you lose? Well, you're a smart person. Why in the world did you do that? I'm like, and then they come across very narcissistic and like, oh, I would never have done that. That never would have happened.
Yeah, you would have.
Exactly. So, but there's no consequences. So here's back to the accountability. You know, where do we start taking accountability for our actions? And when we do something wrong, you know, there's no, in our world today, the tolerance for crime is huge. And no one wants to be the bad guy and say, you did bad, you did wrong, you have to pay her back, you have to, you know, do some time. They don't want to do that if we can find them. But it's always this, you know, not my fault, someone else's fault. So in my ideal world, yes, I take accountability for what I did. I said, hello, you know, I wasn't out there looking to be taken. I'm a very trusting person. And I think we see that in our victim group, in our survivor group. Everybody is taught to be a trusting, except as a child when there's that stranger danger. At some point, you know, my grandchildren are taught to shake some stranger's hand and the stranger danger goes away. We get online right now. There's no manual on how to deal with being online.
We have a manual.
Well, we do now, but I didn't know it at the time, right? You know, we don't have those ideals on this is how you can safely be online. Because the rules change every day.
Right.
If you think about it, you know, we'll teach somebody, don't do this. Set up your privacy settings on your social media. I mean, I got taken on Facebook one day because I was distracted. I had a victim contact me. It wasn't her, but because I was distracted, and where you say take that pause, I was busy.
Right.
So how do we settle back and get that busyness out of our lives and pay attention when I want to get on my computer and do things pretty quickly? And that I saw this the other day, they were talking about the two-factor authentication, how irritating it is. It is, but it'll save us.
Not irritating once you adapt your
I know it's
expectation.
it's the adaptation to these changes in what we have to do.
Right.
So in my ideal world, we would all be civil to one another. We would have families. We would, you know, here's a side note. When I went to court in Dallas with one of our survivors, and she saw one of the criminals in person, spoke to that criminal.
A Nigerian scammer, by the way.
That scammer, yeah, he was there talking to his attorney while she was giving her victim impact statement. And she stopped and said, "Judge, can he listen to me? Can you make him listen to me?" And the judge did.
Okay.
And for a moment, we felt that that man, young man, looked at her as if she could have been his grandmother. Now, was he sorry? He said he was. We don't know if he was sorry because he got caught or sorry because he really hurt her.
Right.
But it gave her an opportunity to be a person, not just some being online. There was a personal connection there. And we don't see that. We don't see that resolution to most crimes like this. We don't get any money back for the most part. And so I've been working with a group out of Canada called Verifin, and I was up at NASDAQ last month, listening to a human trafficking story, which is very similar to a relationship fraud as far as the money. As far as the money goes, and the gal I was up there and met for the first time, but I loved, she was talking about how the transactions tell a story. And if they're looking at it from a banking point of view, my case was typical. I had never done a wire transfer in my life. And all of a sudden in 2 years, I'm sending $25, $50, $100,000. And the fraud department didn't stop that, didn't alert, that has changed, I think, over the last 10 years, not enough. But they can look at those transactions, and those transactions tell a story on where things are going and what's happening. And that we need to do more of.
Right.
Absolutely. And then in our ideal world, trafficking victims have a very hard time with establishing bank accounts or doing anything else, just like we do, especially mules. Your bank account gets shut down because you've been a mule. You have a really hard time getting another one set up. So it's that awareness in the administrations of financial organizations or law enforcement, where they can look at us as individuals that have made a misstep, not a mistake, a misstep. And how can we build up? We want to be responsible again. We want to be responsible financial people again. And it's very difficult when the world is saying, well, that was stupid, and now we're not going to help you out. That was your problem. You're going to go into bankruptcy, or whatever is going to happen to victims of crime. Our ideal world needs to work together and realize that it could be you, it could be me. I hope it's not. It could be your mother, your grandfather, your father. It will be one of them at some point. It could be your daughter or son. How can we, yes, stop it? But if it does happen, and when it happens, how can we be there to help people get through it and then go forward? So it's a tough thing. Reporting has got to be encouraged. We can't be shut down when we walk into law enforcement and they laugh at you. That'll shut it down. That's why only 5 out of 100, Tim, report?
Gallup said 4%. We say 3%.
Okay.
Yeah. So people aren't going to want to report.
That isn't the fault of the police department anymore. That's a misnomer.
Okay,
the real problem is victim guilt and shame.
I agree.
True.
But now you say that
law enforcement has changed radically in the last 10 years.
they have, but you take IC3. IC3 operates strictly on a triage type system. So the person who loses, $10,000 is not nearly as important as
And they're not going to be contacted.
Right.
So part of that challenge is the simple problem that we've tried to address with Department of Justice and the FBI, which is that IC3 does not respect victims' rights, constitutional rights in the United States, which are clearly delineated. The FBI delineates them, but they don't follow them. Most victims on IC3 are never told anything.
Right.
And yet constitutionally, they're required to be told the status of their investigation, to be given resources, to be given forms of assistance and support, etc.
I never heard a thing.
Pardon me?
Right.
I never heard a thing, and I lost a lot of money.
I know,
Right.
and that's our argument.
Yeah.
Most local law enforcement are not fully aware of victims' rights, even at the state level. So we have challenges, to be clear. In my perfect world, it would be a collaboration between national law enforcement agencies throughout Europe, throughout Asia, throughout the United States and the Americas, enabling certain categories of crime to be enforced across borders. And we actually have a very interesting quasi special forces group, quasi law enforcement agency known as the Diplomatic Security Service that does snatch and grabs across borders, cartel members and the like. Regardless, I want to thank both of you for sharing your thoughts with me today. Very interesting conversation. And I'd like to give you an opportunity for a final thought, final question, final comment. Debbie, let's go to you first so that Brett can have the final word.
Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you for just discussing this, for making people aware. That's my big tagline, is beware and be aware. And it's working across organizations and not putting anybody else down, not shaming anybody else. We all have something worthwhile to do, and it's just too big for all of us to do by ourselves. So we need to work together. We need to, like I tell Tim all the time, we need to play well in the sandbox together. And so I thank you, Brett, for the information you give to us, because I don't think like you do. That's why I was on the other side of the spectrum here. But by learning, again, what you know and what you've done, and how I can protect myself better by knowing what you've done and by understanding a little bit of what you've done, and vice versa, because you have been very open to our organization and hearing it from the victim side too. And we all need to do that. And that's what's been a great thing for me, is to be able to get past the guilt and the shame and the blame and all that over the years, and to be able to speak out and really honestly tell people what happened.
Right.
And alert them as to, this is happening every day. We need to watch out and listen. You have to listen to what your neighbors are saying, because the victims aren't going to talk. They're not going to tell people they're sending money, but they will. And that might be a problem there, where they stop talking to their friends. They start to isolate. There's something going on. So we all need to bring back that sense of community and watch out for one another. And this is really, really important, because the after effect of a scam is difficult for the individual, the family, the neighbors, the community, everybody. And that's, it is not as I could be a solopreneur in my company, this is not a solopreneur problem. This is a global problem, and each of us is involved in it. And I want to thank you for what you're doing, and Tim for what SCARS is doing.
No,
Well,
Debbie,
just remember that every 7.5 seconds, there's another American scam victim. And when you take that worldwide, it's easily 3 times that.
Right.
So, Brett, final thought, final comment, final question, observation,
final thought.
deep thought.
So, with me, I first want to thank you and Debbie for inviting me on. I appreciate that, and I think you both do outstanding work. I think SCARS is outstanding as well. It needs to be done, and you guys are doing that every single day, and I appreciate that. I do. Final thought, to me, it's that thing I said before of community. We need to get past the point where we're only looking after ourselves and start trying to look after each other. And we're going to fail at that miserably most of the time. But just the idea of trying to get it done makes a world of difference. And I think it really takes hold after a while. I end my show when I'm talking, I end with stay safe, stay secure, stay vigilant, and just do the right damn thing. I was in my 40s until I started to really take to heart that idea of just doing the right damn thing. That's more than just obeying the law. It's looking at yourself, it's looking at others, it's looking at the world at large, and every single day trying to figure out, okay, What is that right thing? What do I need to do? How can I be a benefit and not a detriment to society, to this planet? And I think that's really what we need to get to the point of. And I'll just leave it with that thought. You know, that thing I said before of love thy neighbor as thyself and do unto others as you would have do unto you. I don't think there's a more truthful, important set of ideas ever than those two right there.
Well, it's certainly what we try to practice, radical truth,
right,
radical honesty, because in reality, without absolute honesty, throw away the passive aggressive, throw away the passivity. You have to be able to recognize the world as it is. And it's not a fun place. So with that having been said, I think we came up with some interesting ideas, but it's still largely beyond our control to fix this problem. But all we can do is be that little part of the ethical solutions that we're asking the world to implement. And I thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
So this has been a presentation of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, a nonprofit crime victim assistance, advocacy, services, and support organization supporting victims of scam, fraud, cybercrime worldwide. You can learn more about SCARS at againstscams.org. You can learn more about these crimes themselves on romancescamsnow.com and on scamsnow.com, two separate websites. And we thank all of our partners for working with us and aiding us in this process, including you, Brett, who is an advisor to SCARS, and we're tremendously appreciative of that. And be sure to listen to Brett's new podcast available on YouTube. Do a search for Criminal Thoughts with Brett Johnson. So thank you both. Debbie, do you have any announcements you'd like to throw into the pool at this point in time? Anything coming up that you're doing?
Not right now. I'm actually I take it back. On Monday, I am in having an interview with the fella from the UK as we're looking to reach across the pond. And every day brings something new.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you both for joining me today, and we wish all of you stay safe online. As Debbie says, be aware and beware.